Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around it is my review of the 1979 horror film Tourist Trap. Now before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out once again to Brock for requesting another review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Tourist Trap is, in my opinion, honestly a bit of a gem. Now, I don't love this film as much as I initially did after the first time that I saw it, but I still really enjoy this movie and I have a lot of fun with it. I think it's a fun take on the slasher genre. There's a lot of unique touches that this film has that I think really help it stand out in a good way. And it's one of those movies that really shows that you can still provide a lot of genuine chills and thrills in the horror genre without really having a ton of blood or even gore. Like, this is a very tame film when it comes to blood and guts and carnage and whatever, but it still has a way to get under your skin and be creepy and eerie in ways that some of the bloodier slashers of the time or of the next decade after this film was released in the 80s didn't really have. Like, for instance, I think this is a better horror film than something like The Prowler. The Prowler has great gore, but it doesn't have as good of atmosphere, the plot isn't as interesting, and the characters aren't as strong. So, Tourist Trap to me is actually a better horror film than something like The Prowler, despite The Prowler having more going for it when it comes to the practical effects or the gore. Now, Tourist Trap is directed by David Schmoeller, and I think David Schmoeller did a absolutely amazing and just really good job directing this film. This is a movie that has a very off-kilter, weird look and vibe to it, and a lot of that is due to David Schmoeller's approach as a director. He balanced the weirdness of the movie with an equally weird, off-putting camera style, and camera style isn't really the right word for it. Directing style. It's a very weird, surreal looking film. So he uses some soft focus at times to really create this sort of surreal look. He uses uh, different kind of angles with the camera to continue to keep the audience off guard visually. Uh, Also uses some very kind of herky-jerky sort of pans and some other things to just really continually keep the audience on edge when it comes to the visuals in the film. And he works really well with the lighting and shadows and just really emphasizing certain aspects of the film visually. Like, for instance, the creepy mask that the killer wears, uh, and it's just one of those things where it's a film that really does look quite dynamic, despite being a very low budget affair. It's a really nice looking film. It's a shame that the full moon Blu-ray that recently came out is so bad. I've seen a lot of reviews that have said it's like good and the picture quality is solid, and I'm like, did I get the wrong disc or something? Because I was thoroughly unimpressed with Full Moon's work on their most recent release of Tourist Trap. I thought the picture quality was muddy. I thought it wasn't really that impressive. I thought it was actually pretty lame. There were some shots where you could tell that it was a VHS rip that they just threw in there because you could see the scan lines. I think that's because they were throwing in some deleted scenes or uncut sequences or something in there, and that was the best that they could find. But there was no disclaimer or anything where it said, "Oh, we didn't have the right materials. We didn't have a print available that had the deleted scenes, so we used a VHS. They didn't say anything like that. So they advertised it as being uncut and remastered, and it's a very lackluster looking release. The features are okay, but still not as good as something as you would get from another company. Full Moon should have just allowed Arrow Video or Vinegar Syndrome or even Shout Factory to do the Blu-ray of Tourist Trap, because they did a pretty bad job with it. I'm just gonna be honest here. They did not do the best job with their Blu-ray of Tourist Trap. They didn't do the best job with the DVD when they did that either. So this film just deserves better than what Full Moon can provide when it comes to uh, its treatment on Blu-ray or 4K. I definitely don't want to see Full Moon's 4K of this, because they did a 4K of Trancers and it was absolutely terrible. It was a 1080p upscaled rip that was just put on a 4K disc that didn't even have a good audio track. It just had a typical random, well, not random, but average audio track. Didn't have a new audio track or anything. It just had like 2.0 stereo or some shit. And that was the same thing with the Blu-ray for Tourist Trap. The audio was weak too. So yeah, I know I'm kind of pinballing here and I'm not necessarily talking about the film, but I just had to kind of vent a little bit there because I just feel this film deserves better than what Full Moon is providing or has provided when it comes to this movie. And David Schmoeller deserves better because he did such a good job directing this film, and this film has some really nice looking shots in it, and what you get on Blu-ray and DVD is not really providing you with the best looking transfer of that hard work. Now, David Schmoeller also wrote the film along with J. Larry Carroll, and the script has a great hook, so to speak. It has a really good concept going for it, as well as a hook. Like, it starts out with this group of friends who are on a road trip and they wind up at some hole in the wall tourist trap. Uh, and it seems rather unassuming and innocent. And then things turn very sinister and things go horribly awry. It's a great setup for a slasher and for a horror film. And what proceeds after um, all of that is quite chilling. You deal with a lot of these creepy mannequins with these mouths that open and they have no eyes. You have this killer who's wearing this creepy looking mask and a wig. And you bring in telekinesis into the mix, where you have this poor guy. He gets assaulted with telekinesis and actually gets killed with a pipe into his back. And before all of that is happening, he sees these mannequins come to life, and that whole sequence is something straight out of your nightmares, because you got these mannequins who are already creepy and unsettling on their own, and now their mouths are popping open and they're laughing. You know, these weird looking creepy designs as well, in terms of not only just the way the mannequins look, but in terms of other things that are going on in that same sequence. Like there's like this other puppet. It's not really a mannequin because it's just like a puppet with like a creepy looking face on it, and it's demented and it's got this creepy grin, and it's a really surreal, just nightmarish sequence, and it really does grab you with that scene. And it just kind of continually just gets weirder and weirder as you get introduced to Slauson and his split personality, and you get to see more of his hobby, so to speak, his just desire to turn people into mannequins, and the telekinesis aspect, the powers that he has, really does make the script feel rather unique. And I know initially the original screenplay just had it where the mannequins were haunted by the spirits of the people that he killed, but they decided to change that to telekinesis, I think, because of the success of Carrie. And I like the telekinesis bit. It helps it stand out, where it's not just your typical, like, oh, the mannequins are haunted. I'm glad that they didn't go that typical route. But the things that really prevent Tourist Trap from being a great film for me is the characters and some aspects of the script that happen near the end of it that become a little confusing and muddled. The characters. Here's the thing about this film. It's not that I hate anyone that's in this cast. It's not that I specifically can point out significant issues that I have with Davy or Molly or Jerry or Eileen or Becky or Tina or Woody. It's just one of those things where these characters just kind of run together, and when it comes to the way that they were written. They don't really stand out that much. And as a result, I don't really have the same strong connection with the film as I do with other movies, other horror films, where the characters are stronger and more likable or more interesting or more charismatic. It's just one of those things where they're just very typical, very average characters. There's no one in this cast that I really necessarily relate to, let alone really connect that strongly with. I'm very indifferent on them. So it's one of those things where like I don't love them, but I don't hate them, but I'm in very firmly in the middle with these characters. So the sequences of suspense or horror, they're not really as effective as they could have been if I was more engaged with these characters. And I think that really does just come down to the script. Like a lot of these characters, there's not much depth to them. A lot of these characters, you don't really give them a lot of time to grow or to show that much personality. Like there's a little bit early on with them hanging out in the Jeep, and then they go to some watering hole or whatever, but there's not a lot of that going on. So I feel if you had a few more scenes of them having banter with one another, or uh, hanging out, or something along those lines, maybe they have like a moment where they camp out or something and they share some stories by the fire, or they have to spend the night at the museum, and that's when they share some things where the audience gets to know them a little bit better. That might have made things a little bit stronger when it comes to the characterization, but the way that you have things set up in the film, it's relatively weak when it comes to characterization. So there's really not a lot to these characters, and as a result, there's really not a lot of a reason to care when a lot of them die. Despite the fact that there are some sequences that are really harrowing and kind of intense, like the girl who's tied up, strapped to the table, and then has the plaster put on her face, and she slowly suffocates to death. But there's other stuff where it just doesn't really leave that much of an impression. And even that sequence isn't as strong as it could have been, because that character, like, I was just like, it's kind of one of those take it or leave it kind of characters. I would say the most memorable or strongest character is definitely the lead, the final girl, Molly. But even then, like, she's not up there with other final girls in other slasher films. And what I mean by certain things being muddled, like there's a whole sequence near the end where Molly is surrounded by these mannequins, and I guess she like hallucinates that they've come to life, and they are flesh and blood, but that still doesn't make sense as to why one of her friends is just randomly a a mannequin. Yeah, Jerry. Why Jerry is just randomly a mannequin? You never see him get essentially dragged away by the killer, by Slauson or anything. He just randomly shows up trying to save Molly, and then Slauson just takes him apart. And you're like, okay, that's surprising, but it doesn't make any logical sense. So there are some genuinely muddled moments with this script, and that's definitely one of them. I like the ending. I think it's definitely something that sticks with you. How she sees the mannequins that come to life, and the wife that becomes animated, and then she kills Slauson with an axe, and then she's totally in a daze and completely uh, crazed now, probably in the midst of a mental breakdown, and she drives away in the Jeep with the mannequin versions of her friends in the back seat. I thought that was a very intriguing way to end the film. But like I said, it's kind of muddled in terms of the mannequins coming to life. Why was that happening? None of that was ever explained. That would have made more sense with the original version of the script where the mannequins were haunted. Then it would kind of make sense. But it seemed like that might have been something from that original script that they kept in the film, but they never really explained it in terms of how Slauson's telekinesis could make hallucinations. So it's one of those things where, I think the script kind of started to fall apart a little bit near the end. But like I said, it has a good hook. It sets things up well enough. Uh, there are some okay kills. That's one thing I definitely think the film could have been a little bit better in too as a slasher. There's really nothing in terms of a memorable death. I guess the closest is when the guy gets killed with a telekinetic pipe and his blood drips out of the pipe onto the floor. But I mean, other than that, like you have a little bit where someone gets stabbed, I think, in the back of their head, and Slauson gets killed with an axe. And there's that moment where the girl is getting plaster over her face. But there's a lot of stuff where either something happens off screen or you don't really see much of anything. And that's why the film ultimately got a PG, despite David Schmoeller and other people involved with the production feeling that it should have been rated R. Uh, that's probably another reason why it didn't do as well when it came out, is because it was PG. There was no PG-13 rating, so a lot of horror fans, when the film came out, they're like, PG? This is for kids. And they just didn't go to see it. Which is a shame, because for a PG rated film, it still has a lot of intense moments and some genuine uh, moments of fear and chills. Could have had a few more. Honestly, I think if it was more violent, that might have given it more of a visceral punch that I think might have helped it reach a level that it's honestly incapable of the way that it is. It's one of those things where I like the fact that it does a lot without a lot of gore and without a lot of blood and whatever, but just having like one scene of visceral violence would have absolutely uh, helped this movie in terms of its overall effectiveness. A good example of that is the House of Wax remake, which, in all honesty, in a lot of ways, is a better version of this movie. You have a lot of these you have a group of characters who are on a road trip. They decide to stop at this tourist trap, which happens to be, instead of like this Civil War museum or well, I don't think it was a Civil War museum, but it was some kind of museum of history. Instead of it being something along those lines, it's a house of wax, and they're being terrorized by this killer who also wears a mask. And there is a scene in the film where a guy gets turned into a wax mannequin against his will, and he's like alive while he's a mannequin. And it's a really intense and visceral sequence. And something like that definitely could have elevated this movie. And yeah, I've wondered why this hasn't been remade, but now I know why, because it already got a remake. It's called House of Wax. Um, but yeah, script could have used some work, but it's still decent enough. Now, the performances by the cast, they're also what I would call pretty decent. I would say the biggest standout is Chuck Connors as Mr. Slauson. I thought he did a good job playing both the kind caretaker of the museum, where you would not necessarily assume that he's any sort of threat, as well as the more demented, twisted version of his psyche. I thought he did a great job playing both those sides of his personality. And he was definitely the best part of the film for me. Best performer, I mean, not necessarily the best part of the film, period. I would give that to the direction or the costume design or the art direction or the score by Pino Donaggio. But when it comes to the best performance in the film, definitely goes to Chuck Connors. Shailar Coby is Davy, Jocelyn Jones is Molly, John Van Ness is Jerry, Robin Sherwood is Eileen, Tanya Roberts is Becky, Don Jeffory-Nelson is Tina, and Keith McDermott as Woody. They're all fine. They're decent enough. I felt the group of characters, they had okay chemistry, but it wasn't great. And I would say out of like all of the group of young adults, I would definitely say Molly Jocelyn Jones was the one that provided the best acting performance. But even that was just kind of above average. While I felt Chuck Connor's performance is actually pretty great. Um, Tanya Roberts, it's nice to see her, and she's a gorgeous woman, but she didn't really have a lot to do, and it just felt like her role was kind of wasted. Honestly, she had enough charisma in her scenes that I think it might have been a good idea to have made her the lead instead of Jocelyn Jones. No offense to Jocelyn Jones, she was fine, but she just didn't have that extra bit of charisma and personality that Tanya Roberts had. So I think that was kind of a missed opportunity not to have Tanya Roberts be the lead over Jocelyn Jones, because Molly was just kind of a plain Jane sort of character, and the performance was pretty plain as a result. But that might be exactly what the writer or the director wanted, so I guess when it comes to what they were looking for, Jocelyn Jones did a good job, but it just still wasn't one of those performances that was really much of a standout. Linnea Quigley apparently is also in this as a mannequin, but she's uncredited. I didn't recognize her. Maybe it's because she's a mannequin and like you don't really see a lot of her features. I don't know, but she's in this apparently. Um, but yeah, decent enough cast. Nothing spectacular, nothing amazing, nothing great. But good enough. The cinematography by Nicholas von Sternberg I thought was pretty solid. Nice looking film, especially when it comes to the shots at night or the shots of the museum when the lights are dim, or the sequences involving the killer in the basement torturing these poor people, trying to turn them into mannequins. The editing by Ted Nicolo I thought was was pretty excellent, honestly. There were a lot of scenes where there's a lot of stuff going on, flying at the screen, or mannequins laughing, or mouths gaping open, and cameras doing quick pans, and all this other sort of stuff. So it can get kind of chaotic and just off the wall. I think the editing really did emphasize those moments well and didn't really come across as that jarring. It was a rather seamless addition to the overall experience of the film. The score by Pino Donaggio I thought was remarkable. This is honestly one of my favorite scores of his. The music itself is enough to really unnerve me and get under my skin because it's just such a weird, surreal, bizarre score. And I know the producers, they weren't really that enthusiastic about it, despite the fact that they paid Pino Donaggio the majority of the film's budget, apparently. They wanted a more synthetic score, with like synths and so on. And Pino Donaggio delivered something that was completely the opposite of that. But I think they were dead wrong. I think a more synth heavy score would have just not fit this film or the tone of the movie, and it wouldn't have elevated the film as much as the more traditional piano or orchestral score that Pino Donaggio created for Tourist Trap. The film is like 90 minutes, but it doesn't really have a lot of moments where it slows down considerably. Like there's a few moments where it kind of hits a few bumps and kind of stumbles a little bit, but then it gets on its feet pretty quickly. I would think it's definitely a relatively fast-paced film in terms of uh, when it comes to the way that things play out throughout the production, in terms of the blocking or what happens scene by scene. Um, and overall, yeah, I think it is a gem. I think it's a good film. It could have been a great film if it was a little bit more visceral, if the writing was a little less muddled when it comes to the last like 10 to 15 minutes, and if you just had stronger characters or a little bit more depth to them, or at least personality. But with what you have here, it's still a nice, creepy, unsettling, bizarre film that I think absolutely deserves its cult following that it's gotten over the years. And I would recommend it. I would definitely recommend Tourist Trap. I think it's a solid horror movie. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Tourist Trap. And until next time, as always, I'll see you later. See ya.